All right. Okay, well, hello everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion organized by the Innovating Teachers Academy. My name is Dunia Chamberlain. I'm a teacher and the founder of INTA, and I will be your host today. Before we begin, I just want to let you know that this session is being recorded so that teachers who could not attend at this time can watch it at a later time. Also, if you have any questions during the discussion, please feel free to write them in the chat, and we'll take your questions at the end of the panel during our Q&A section. I just want to tell you a little bit about INTA before we get into the panel. So INTA, which is short for Innovating Teachers Academy, was born from a simple idea. Teachers thrive when they are connected, supported, and inspired by one another. At INTA, we offer a caring and supporting and inspiring community of teachers with discussion groups. We offer training sessions by teachers for teachers focused on real classroom challenges. We have ready-to-use teaching resources to enrich your lessons. And we offer interactive live sessions and panel discussions like this one on themes that we all encounter in our classrooms. Today, we're diving into a theme that speaks to the heart of teaching, Aspire. Together, we'll explore how the Aspire principles can be transformed into practical, everyday strategies that foster inclusion, respect, and student growth. Through real examples from school, this discussion will highlight how educators can create classrooms built on belonging, safety, and positive relationships. I'm delighted to welcome our four exceptional guests. We have Dr. Sue Roffey, is an honorary professor at University College London and is a director of Growing Great Schools Worldwide. We have Ian Prince, is the Director of Teaching and Learning at the St. Clair Primary School and at the Primary Schools Partnership in Southampton. We also have Dom Boddington, is a teacher and the founder of Respect for Us, an off-site provision for excluded students. He is also a school governor and research partner on the Love of Learning project. And we have Michelle Deeks. She is a psychologist and the director of At My Best and Work Positive. She is also a co-developer of the Aspire culture cards. Thank you, all four of you, for being here with us today. So to start off our panel discussion, I'd like to turn to Dr. Sue Roffey. Sue, you've been the driving force behind Aspire. Could you share with us how these principles first developed and what they're rooted in?
Yes, I'd love to do that. Welcome to everybody, and thanks very much for being here. I think the best thing for me to do is, first of all, is to actually talk about what Aspire actually stands for. The A is agency, the S is safety, P for positivity, I for inclusion, R for respect, and E for equity. And really, one of the reasons they've been developed is that they need to apply that to everything that happens across the school, what students learn, how they learn, and the environment they learn in. These are the two books that were published last year, one for early years and primary and one for secondary schools. Each chapter is about what does this mean, why does it matter, and examples from across the world of people putting those principles into practice. So where does it come from? Basically, it's based in research evidence from positive psychology and wellbeing research, which is all about what enables individuals and communities to thrive, to be at their best, and also around relationships and education research. What is actually going on in schools around leadership, around what is actually engaging people in a love of learning. For me, education needs to align with what we know promotes healthy child development. Just for instance, children who are young should not just be sitting on their bottoms in rows, because that does not align with healthy child development. They shouldn't be told what to do all the time. They've got ideas of their own. It's also based, as well as all of the research that I've read over many years now, also my own experience. As a teacher, I was a teacher for many years, most of that with children and young people who were struggling with emotional, social and behavioural difficulties. I became an educational psychologist, so I worked with schools and families and students. Then I became an academic, and of course I did lots of research as an academic, and also there's a lot of research involved in writing. Now, although I'm going to talk very briefly about what these principles all mean, one of the things I want to say loud and clear is that they all interact and reinforce each other. So this is a summary of what they each mean. Now, agency is very simply having a voice in what concerns you, being able to make decisions about what concerns you. Now, sometimes adults need to make decisions for children, but they're not given as much credit as I think we need to for having ideas of their own. We know that teachers need to be in charge of proceedings in a school. That's important, but that doesn't mean controlling students. We need to find another way of interacting with them. And that means giving them opportunities and encouragement to do things that make a difference, because young people, children, when they're given those opportunities, really do want to make a difference to their environment. And one of the things that strikes me a lot is the more agency we give somebody, the more responsibility they take for themselves and their actions. Safety is about physical, social, emotional, psychological, and in this day and age, digital safety, being safe online. But it also means being accepted for who you are, not trying to fit into somebody else's idea of who you should be. If you are not going to be constantly anxious about taking risks with your learning, you need to have making mistakes as a pathway to learning. They need to be accepted as a step in the learning process. You need to know that people around you care about you and you can trust them to have your back. Dom and I were in a school last week, and one of the things that the students were saying to us over and over again, both verbally and in writing, is that what we feel about this school is that we felt safe. And that matters a lot to young people. Some of them don't always feel safe, and being in school is so important. If schools are overly competitive, then some people are going to be a loser. So the more collaboration and the less competition, the more safety. Positivity is the third of the Aspire principles, and we know, because of Barbara Fredrickson's work, that positive emotions enhance creativity and problem solving, whereas negative emotions shut down cognitive pathways. It's hard to think straight when you're full of negative feelings. Positive values in action include those things you can see on the screen, being kind to each other, and actually not focusing on what's going wrong and what the matter is, but actually saying, where do we need to get to? Having a solution focus. Using the language of strengths, not actually dismissing kids with negative language, but actually focusing on what they do well and the strengths they are developing. And it's so important to have playfulness in schools. It's part of healthy child development. Kids want to have fun. And one of the things that we see in the schools that really work is that there is a sense of playfulness and having fun in learning together. Inclusion is where everyone feels welcomed. and you value that diversity that's so critical to a well-functioning community, participation is facilitated. Isaac Prolotensky, who I'm a great fan of his work, he has developed a theory of mattering and has written about this. And mattering means that not only do you feel that you are valued for who you are in the school, but you are also of value so that you can have opportunities to contribute. So important. And what we know about belonging in school is that school belonging also means that you know that you're making some progress. So that is actually really important. The fifth of the Aspire principles is respect, and that's for individuals, for groups, for cultures, for the environment, the world we live in. It's about treating each other with dignity. And some people say the respect is treating others as you would want to be treated, although some people disagree with that. And it's not about prejudging someone and jumping to conclusions about their motivation or intent or who they are or what they want, or not actually saying the way we do things is better than the way you do things. That's respectful. And it's not imposing your authority to actually put people down and dominate the agenda. One of the things that is very close to my heart is that respect needs to be modelled at every stage of the educational process, from preschool to the time a student leaves. They need to know what respect is because they have experienced it. We have in our society at the moment increasing racism and misogyny and other things that are not good. And one of the things that people say is that we need to vet people before they get appointed into the police or the military. And my argument about this is that those children, those young men have been children in school for many years. We need to ensure that respect is threaded through everything that happens in a school. And I know that Don will talk more about that. The last is equity. And for everyone to have optimal opportunities to thrive and learn, we can't have a one size fits all because people aren't the same. We can't treat everyone the same and have the same expectations of them because people are different, and we need to acknowledge that diversity. And in order to do that, we need to be flexible and adaptable in order to be fair to our students. Now, I'm hoping that some people will maybe ask a bit more information about that, but that's a sort of a whistle-stop tour of Aspire.
Well, thank you, Sue. I think it's a wonderful foundation that we can use to build on. Could you tell us maybe why do these principles matter so deeply in today's schools?
Well, I mean, to start with, one of the things that Dom and I are very involved in at the moment, and I'm sure he'll talk about this as well as maybe Ian when he arrives, is we now know that there's a lot of children who are opting out of school. Either their attendance is poor or they're actually opting to be educated at home. We know that teacher attrition is a big issue in English schools. There's lots of teachers who don't want to join the profession or don't want to stay in the profession. We know that behaviour is a big issue in many, many schools. And we know that there are some cultures that are actually quite toxic. You know, people are not thriving, and mental health and well-being is something that everybody is concerned about with young people. And although this has been exacerbated by since COVID, it was certainly also happening before COVID. We know that there are some schools who are doing brilliantly well. And what those schools are doing is actually, in lots of ways, they are living the Aspire principles. They're giving children a voice. They are respecting who they are. They are not trying to fit them all into the same pot all the time. And they're making sure that to some extent learning is fun. We actually really need these principles in place in all of our schools in order for kids to actually have a good education that also builds a better world.
Yes, yeah, I totally understand. I totally agree with you. It's so important that students and teachers have fun learning or teaching, because this is already a big part of the teaching, another layer on the content itself. Definitely. Oh, thank you so much. Um, what about now? Let's explore a little bit how Aspire looks in practice across different school contexts and experiences. I'm going to go to Dom. Dom, so you're an offsite provision. Your offsite provision is called Respect for Us. And respect is, of course, one of the central Aspire principle. Why do you think respect is so vital for students, especially those who have experienced exclusion?
Right. Well, first of all, let me correct you. Respect no longer exists. I am retired from that work. Um, why is it important? Well, I've worked since 1975 as a secondary school teacher, and through the first 2 or 3 decades of that, I was doing all the conventional stuff, but increasingly I found I was working with the kind of students that no other teacher wanted to work with. I was doing something. I wasn't quite sure what it was, because whatever it was I was doing seemed so obvious to me, but other people just couldn't get the hang of it. And we developed within the school I was working in the 2000s, we developed an alternative program that actually met the needs of those students. The ones that other teachers just couldn't engage at all for whatever reason. Unfortunately, in the political situation in England meant that schools were trying to raise standards continually, and we had a new government in 2010. The whole standards agenda happened more and more. The school I was working in decided that the best way to raise standards was to start excluding the children that I was working with. So in the end, I'd had enough of that, and the only way I was going to be able to cater for their needs was to work outside the system and set up an alternative provision. I felt these children weren't respected, but it wasn't. We called our organisation Respect, but we could just as easily have called it Aspire. I didn't know it then because Sue hadn't written her book. But all those principles that she's outlined, we used very much in Respect for Us. We looked at the needs of each individual child. We welcomed them. It was a family atmosphere. We worked out of some industrial premises, a collection of offices and workrooms and a huge workshop. But at the center of everything was a kitchen. We tried to create a home, which of course many of these children lacked and had no experience of. At the center of it all was we loved them, and that's what lies behind the whole of the Aspire ethos is the love factor. So we cooked, they cooked, we cooked together. We lived together. We sat down around the same table. We talked to each other. Most of all, we listened. And so many of these children, their lives, their backgrounds had not been respected in the high school. Teachers come in, for the best of reasons, but they have an agenda and things that they're required to do, and they have little meaning to many children. So we would look at each individual child, work out what it was that they needed, and then we'd do our very best to provide that. Respect. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does very well. I was just while listening to you. So yes, you're creating a home, you're cooking, you're having discussions together. Now, I'm trying. What came in my mind is so as a teacher, I am in front of 24
yeah.
students. Could you give me some concrete examples of what I could do to bring that principle of respect into my class or with my students?
It starts from the moment that you greet your children. So many teachers greet them with a frown. That you need to be warm, smiling, open, receptive. Your body language. You never criticize a child openly. You find diplomatic ways of getting the message across, especially if you work well with all children, but especially important with teenagers.
All right. So you're saying that I should, as a teacher, I should also be very aware of what I am modeling in front of the class.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in a good school, those relationships will be modeled throughout the school. So it's how the teachers are with each other. It's how the leadership team is with the teachers, with the children. Everybody models the same kindness, openness, giving everybody a chance, listening to people. There are times when you had to be firm with children, but if they know that you're there for them, they will take that. If they know that they are loved, part of the family, they will accept correction and accept that there are boundaries. From time to time, things go completely wrong, and we cope with that calmly. There was never any shouting. Respect for us. We never shouted at children.
It's very inspiring, and like you say, like Sue said earlier, if you make mistakes, you learn mistakes, you learn from them. I see Sue would like to add something to this.
Yes, I just want to say a little bit about what you just said, Andrew, about having 25 children. I mean, if you are actually doing regular social and emotional learning, then one of the things that if teachers are engaged with that, I mean, I run something called Circle Solutions where everybody mixes up all the time so that teachers get an opportunity to talk to children. And if you do that on a regular basis, it doesn't take long. 20 minutes a couple of times a week will be sufficient. You actually get to know some of your students in a different sort of way. And one of the things that students say, and this was a piece of research that was done in New South Wales, is they like it when a teacher gets to know me a bit. And if you can identify some of your more stroppy kids and you can find something that you have in common with them, a team you support, a music that you both like, whatever it is, something you both like to eat, then you can have micro conversations with them. And it's the micro conversations that actually over time develop into relationships in which that young person will be much more prepared to listen to you than he will be with somebody than they will be with somebody who dismisses them or actually doesn't treat them like somebody with human being with a life outside school.
Yes, I totally agree. The connections we tend to forget, but the connections are so important. There's not only connections between disciplines or connections between content, but there's also the connection between people that make a big difference in your class. Yeah, thank you. I'm going to go to Michelle. So, Michelle, you've been working closely with Sue on developing the development of the Aspire culture cards, which have not been piloted in schools and other organizations yet, if I'm right. Could you tell us a little bit about how these cards are being used?
Yes, we have actually already piloted them, which is great. So I can share some examples of how they've been used in schools. So the cards are a way of trying to bring Aspire, one way in which we can bring Aspire to life and think about what it means in practice to embed the Aspire principles. And as Dom and Sue have already said, and you've already talked about, this isn't just about in the classroom. This is between teachers, with other staff. It's across the whole organisation of the school or the college or the university or whatever entity we're talking about. And the cards are physical cards. And we have the Aspire principles on each of the cards with a short definition. And then for each of the principles, so I've got the one inclusion here, we then have a set of statements that link to that. And very much consistent with what Sue and Dom have already said, agency is the first principle within Aspire. So if we want to embed these ways of being in an organisation, a classroom or a school, then we need everybody in the school to be part of that embedding. This isn't about imposing something. And that's where the cards come to play, because it's an opportunity for children, teachers, other staff to have conversations about what does it mean for Aspire to exist in our school? What does it look like in our classroom? And we've had some really lovely stories come out from the piloting that we've done. We've been really lucky to have some fabulous teachers and members of senior leadership teams trying out the cards for us. I think one of my favourite exercises was a teacher who gave a card to each of her students. So the cards with the statements on, so the ones I've got here are: we all have strengths, we try new things, we feel heard, we look out for each other. So we've got those kinds of statements on cards. And she gave one to each child in her class. And she said, right, now what I want you to do is I want you to go around and I want you to find somebody else who has a card that is connected to yours. And what she did through that exercise is no child was singled out to define anything. There was no single definition of anything. It was an acceptance that we've got different ways of talking about things and different connections between these different behaviours and thoughts and feelings. But she embedded that point that Sue made about all of these things are connected. And so the children went around and they connected with one or more of their peers, and they had a conversation about what their card meant and what the other cards meant and how they thought they were connected. And so it was the start of exploring what the Aspire principles mean for us in our classroom. And then we've had lots of examples of people then taking that to the next level and saying, so can everybody pick out a card that for them is a behaviour that we see lots in this classroom, and talking about those stories and where can we get them more? How can we be doing even more of that? Can anybody pick out a card of a behaviour they'd like to see more in this classroom, or a behaviour they think is really important in this classroom? And those kinds of conversations have been held in the classroom with students, but also in the staff room with staff. And also one head teacher actually also did a very similar exercise with parents, asking the parents to share examples of what they see going on in their child's school, what they really appreciate, where they see the opportunities to be. So strengthening those connections between families and the school, which is, we know, is so important. Those principles of embedding it across through everyone, the threading that Sue talked about, it's having something like hard, simple statements that ground the principles and allow people to start having conversations about what that looks like for us in practice. And there's no right answer in the sense of we try new things. One child will give a different definition of that to another child. And that's absolutely fine. I think the importance of accepting those differences, as long as we can all link it into what that actually means at the sort of higher level. So yes, lots of very practical examples about how the cards are being used, which has been lovely to see.
I love how that one teacher did use the cards with the parents, because we tend to, well, sometimes we forget to keep in mind that learning is in a triangle, and you have the students, you have the administration, and then you have the parents. And we need to have, again, we're talking about connection. We should be the three tips should be connected in order to help our students more. While you were talking, I just had a question. So we have these 6 principles, and so we're starting with agency, and then safety, and so on. Are they in a certain order of priority? Like, is there the agency? Is it first because it's more important? Is it more present to do, or are they just all at an equal level?
I think I'll let Sue answer that question.
No. is the answer to that. No. I mean, and things are very definitely interactive. And I'll just give you a very silly story. I was about to develop a different set of Strengths in Circles cards in Australia, which are now defunct because we have the Aspire Culture cards. And we were about to go to print, and they were the Rapids cards. And I was sitting having a cup of tea with my husband, and I said, Rapids is such a rubbish acronym. It's rubbish, right? And then he said, and this is why I was reminded why I married him. He said, if you changed democracy to equity, you could have Aspire. And I thought, perfect. So the order doesn't matter. And what I was going to say is that in the school that Dom and I visited last week, there was one girl who was, lots of the children, as I said, talked about how they felt safe. And one girl says, you know, I really like maths because one of the reasons is I really like to challenge myself. You know, and for me, that was just very much aligned with, unless she felt safe, she wasn't actually going to take those risks with her learning, and her learning was developing hand over fist because of that. And I think that it's important to remember how interactive they all are.
Yes, yeah, very true, very true. Sorry, can I go back to Michelle? I wanted to ask you still, so with these cards, you've tried them out. What kind of, do you have any concrete examples of impact or feedback that you've seen so far using these cards?
Yeah, so the feedback we've had so far is qualitative. You know, we've been gathering people's reflections on how they work, but the kinds of things people have been saying to us have been, I heard one teacher said that, you know, the children opened up and we had conversations we'd never had before. We've had instances where I think one of the things that people have really appreciated about them is being able to use the same cards at different levels. So with 8-year-olds, with the 11-year-olds, and also with staff. And so stories about the consistency that allows you to have around having conversations and using the same principles and recognizing that these things look different. I mean, Sue's example of safety, that one student might be saying, well, I can challenge myself. I was in a school this morning, and one of the examples for me of safety I was observing a group of musicians doing an assembly with the years 3 to 6, which is the 7 to 11-year-olds in the UK. And at the end of the assembly, there were two things that were really striking. One was the children sitting there with their hands up, and the teacher who took time to say, have you got a question for the musicians? And those children's, you know, their bravery at asking the questions, and then being allowed to ask those questions, whatever they were, and having the confidence to do that. And the second thing was the 2 or 3 groups of students who hung around afterwards to come and talk to the musicians. And that demonstrated respect for the people they'd just been listening to, agency, they'd been allowed to stay behind. The teacher had let them stay behind to ask questions. And that sense of safety, they felt like they could go up to these adults that they'd never met before and say, thank you for coming today. Again, showing respect and positivity, and asking their questions and sharing their stories. So I think what we've seen with the card, sorry, I've diverted from the question you asked me, but the feedback we're getting is about being able to use them across levels, opening up conversations that haven't been had before, and being a useful way to have difficult conversations. I think that's been one of the striking pieces of feedback, is that there's something about cards, I think it's very simple, that when you put cards in front of people and say, you choose, this isn't about me asking you a direct question. And it takes away a little bit of the pressure. So if there's a little bit of tension in a classroom or in a staff room about, I'm not so sure, you know, we've got this card, we are kind in what we say and do. Have we got examples of that? And someone said, well, sometimes I'm not sure I see that. And it's a way of having that conversation in a more gentle way. And people saying that then leads to a more positive outcome, because it's taking away a little bit of that heat, but allowing people to share their personal stories, and then allowing them to, lots of examples of people saying, so what we did as a result was we came up with 2 statements, 3 statements, 1 statement that we were then going to work on as a classroom, as a staff group. It helped us to order the principles in terms of where we are right now and where we're going to focus our attention. So yes, they're all important and they all interact, but we're, for this term or for this week, we're going to focus here.
Yeah.
So lots of really valuable conversations and thinking, I think, going on, right through from the staff room and SLT's offices, senior leadership team's offices, right through to individual classrooms.
Oh, no, thank you so much they're very inspiring examples, concrete examples, and make you want to try, that's for sure. I do have one question that I can imagine if I presented this to my staff, I can imagine exactly which teacher would say, someone would put their hand up and say, I'm a science teacher in year 10. How do I fit that in my already packed curriculum? How would I answer that? Is there a way, like, do you do it in, like, for example, would you do this, would you use those cards and would you talk about the principles of Aspire during homeroom? I don't know in England how you call that. Is yeah, we have homeroom, or do you embed it into your content discipline class? Or how do you do that as a teacher who has who teaches a discipline?
I'll give a couple of examples of ways people did it, and I'm sure Sue and Dom will have other recommendations. But what we saw was some people using them for 15 minutes at tutor time. We saw some people building a whole series of wellbeing classes around the card. So where there was time on a timetable for wellbeing, then we had people saying, well, I'm going to take a principle a week and do work with this. We saw examples where teachers just took the principles. So in terms of the cards, they literally just took the 6 principle cards, I haven't got them all to hand, and just talked at that level and got students then to come up with the statements and so on. So it's something that can be threaded through. I think, part of this is about having these a little bit front of mind, and I know it's yet something else for a teacher to have front of mind, but this is our way of being, I guess. Ideally we want to get to the point where, yes, we need to talk about them and so on, but this is the way we are. So it shouldn't be adding, in terms of adding extra weight and so on to the already busy schedules that teachers have. So we saw a real breadth in terms of how long people use the cards for, but I'm sure Sue and Dom would have more examples about how you would embed it.
Oh, thank you. And it actually brings us right back to what Dom was saying, that we need to model it also. It's a big part of it. Yes. I'm going to just go to Sue, and then I see that Ian has joined us. So after Sue, welcome Ian. We'll come back to you right after Sue.
Well, basically, what I want to say relates entirely to Ian, because one of the things that is really difficult is that just beginning to do this with students is valuable. But if we're talking about actually developing the Aspire across a whole school, in lots of ways, it begins with the leadership. It begins with the philosophy. And I think Dom and I are learning more and more about that in the work that we're actually doing. And I would love Ian to talk about, although Aspire is fairly new, he's nevertheless doing this in his school. So, yes, I just wanted to say that it's leadership, and Ian's a leader. So can I just pass over to Ian? Maybe, Dunja, you can invite him to say things.
Well, thank you. That was perfect. I was wondering, how am I going to switch to Ian? But you just did it for me. Thank you. Well, first, welcome, Ian. Ian is a director of teaching and learning. And you've seen how Aspire shapes not only classroom practices, but whole school culture. So could you tell us a little bit, what differences has the application of Aspire made for both your pupils and teachers in your school?
Thank you. First of all, apologies. I think I need to read emails more clearly, because I think I was thrown by Central European time, so I thought I was early.
I think I was too.
So
Sorry.
apologies for that. Yeah, no, I think basically the starting point is what you believe you're here to do in education. What's your mission? And for us personally, we encapsulate that through the tagline of empowering children to be architects of a better world, which sounds fancy, but then it's a case of how do you break that down? So I think some of the key principles to our curriculum beyond, yes, we want our children to be in a good position academically by the time they leave us and go into secondary school because we work in primary school settings. But it's much more than that. And we're thinking about lifelong learners and key traits, if you will. So we're trying to develop expertise in ourselves and our teachers, and we're trying to do that and make our children reflective at the same time. So a big part of our curriculum is around community, active compassion, and opportunities to build cultural capital for all of our children. So that anything we're learning has got a real purpose. So I think first and foremost, and it's hard when you ask the question about the secondary schools, but I think a big impact for us has been it's driving everything you do. So we've got, for example, global goals as one element. The Global Sustainable Development Goals is a curriculum point for us. So we take the national curriculum, but I said to Sue the other week, I think it's what I like about the national curriculum is that it's vague. So you kind of can fulfill it, but you can make it, you can either think of that's daunting or you could think that's exciting and make it your own. And I think we've been very clear as a leadership team that we're clear what we want to develop in our children and the opportunities we want to give them and develop them as people. So therefore that's going to drive what we do. So we've got additions to our curriculum beyond the natural subjects, which would be global goals as an example, but it's also filtered into all of our writing and our geography and our history and our science work. We've also got an outdoor woodland and wellbeing curriculum. So children have weekly opportunities to develop and then exercise throughout the week on mindset, but also on forest schools, about sustainability, about looking after our local environment. And in everything we do, we're always thinking about the self, but then also the school, the local community, national, wider world. So everything kind of spans out, but also comes in. And then I guess it's through the learning, but also then through the experiences, as I've said, but also then from our pupil leaders groups. So we're trying to really develop, and that's where Aspire, I think, really is going to help us moving forward as well, is giving clarity to the pupil leadership groups about their role and how they can interact with each other, feedback and reflect and collaborate with each other because we've got sanctuary groups, reading ambassadors in our Catholic schools, we've got chaplains, we've got school council, house captains, etc. But fundamentally, the same leadership skills and the same traits drive all those groups, and that's the starting point. And we're in the process of using some of the scripts and things from the Circle Solutions around Aspire to help the children to articulate and drive their own mission statements, their own targets for the year, and therefore how they plan to achieve those. And almost we're at a stage where they're now starting to set out their own action plans. So it's learning, all of it's learning and all of its development, but it's from a leadership level, believing that you have to invest time because you see that it's worthwhile beyond just the normal curriculum that's in place.
Yeah. Oh, well, that makes a lot of sense. So the Aspire is driving everything you do, and then you're working definitely on creating or helping students to be lifelong learners, and then working on specific traits that are not only academic but also to be reflective, how to learn, and so on. So that you're
Um,
actually making a whole individual and not only
right.
focusing on the academic side.
We want the children to be resilient problem solvers.
Yes.
They're the traits that the children will talk about learning. They won't just talk about what we do in maths or what we do in science, although they're motivated by that, and they'll talk about why the curriculum's designed in its way that it is. But they understand that there are characteristics and traits and behaviors empowering our actions. I guess the key one is that active compassion, so that the children and we're trying to do that even more, but develop further that it's coming from the children. They're not just people who are acting out what adults have planned, is that they're driving the plans and the organization. And that's where I think the Aspire will come in. And I think what was motivating was seeing how our principles aligned by reading the book and speaking and work, I mean, the opportunity to work with Sue as well. So therefore, you can see how it's a natural fit. I mean, things like super kind that we were using, and then I guess in line with what you've just said, like heart's participation ladder is that key thing. So we're using that for the children, but we're also challenging our teachers and our leaders who run those groups, for example, that how are you developing that in your children? And even at a leader level, to be totally honest as well, is going that the leaders in the school are not doing and setting all the targets then for the middle leaders, etc., and those teachers. It's got to come from that passion from them because they've got a shared vision and understanding of that vision of what we're trying to create.
Mhm. Yes, Sue?
I just want to give an example of being in the school and seeing the Aspire principles enacted all over the place. Just one small example of respect. Never heard a raised voice, like Don was saying, in respect for us, and never saw a child. And it's a quite disadvantaged community that they're actually serving. Never saw a child kick off either. And we had lunch with the children. And when I mean with the children, the senior management line up with the children to take their turn to collect their food. There's no jumping the queue. So it's complete modeling of that level of respect for each other. And then we sat with the children, not just a group of teachers separately, but actually, and the children were very confident about interacting and welcoming people and having conversations over dinner and over lunch. And it was just seeing these things in practice that are not commonplace in many schools. I mean, it was very, very marked, that level of respect and how safe the kids felt and how confident they were. I mean, amazing, amazing work.
Okay.
Yes, and I think it is so important because I hear from many teachers. They're saying that their students are just not as or they seem not as autonomous as before, and they're trying to. Many teachers come to the platform and say, "Can you help us? What can I do to help my students be more autonomous?" And it sounds like that the 6 principles of Aspire may be the way to go. Definitely. Could you maybe, Ian, give us a concrete example of what the one of the principle looks like in day to day, for example, on relationship or on learning, something concrete for the teachers who are here with us on the panel?
Yeah, I guess if we take agency, for example, and I was talking earlier about our pupil leadership groups, but also in their learning. So a big principle for us would be concrete would be that we don't have groups, for example, that this group's doing this work today, that group's doing that work today. It's about flexible based on our confidence. And therefore, with that agency, is a key thing for us in learning would be challenge and choice for the children so that they have an active role in selecting in a maths lesson, for example, the level of difficulty based on their level of confidence. It's not just determined by the adult in the room, that they've got a voice in that based on their own understanding of their own learning. And I think we're constantly trying to build that metacognition and self-regulation. So our teachers, part of our teaching policy is that you're modeling your thinking out loud. And we've got a principle of saying no task without talk. So that it's not just a case of here's a task to do, off you go, good luck. It's there's conferencing at every stage, and you're giving the children opportunities to show what they know, but also have that positivity and understanding that we learn from mistakes. We're not here to no one is trying to catch each other out, but we are here to be honest and find out what we know, what we don't know, and therefore we can use that to help us all to progress and improve. So I guess it's really hard to say like exact concrete other than it's because it's a principle, it's a way of being. It then influences all that you do. So whether that's your learning policy, how you teach, how you train your children, and then like normal scaffolding with the view that whatever's modeled at first over time becomes an unconscious competence over time, because simply becomes what you do. But another big one, I guess, with that agency would be that the children are determining who we're who we're like doing our charity work for. So I've got a great example from one of the schools at Our Lady who have done a lot of work for a school in Zambia, but then they've decided to carry on with that as well and made pen pals off their own back with the children there. They've just done recent fundraising, which means now all the children have got a school uniform. They've helped build a new building over in that school for the headmistress there. And I guess that principle of sticking with something rather than just doing something for an event, but having invested stakeholders. So another one would be the local care home. You know, it started off where simply the children did a carol service, but now it's a point where they're going up, sharing their work, regular visits to that school. So that kind of, again, that act of we're increasing the likelihood of the children being able to collide with success, but that by building knowledge and passion, then the children start to develop an agency of the direction they want to take things in.
Yes, yeah, it is so important in today's world. We need to do more of that, definitely. I also really loved your example of, as a teacher, to make your thinking visible and to find ways of making your students' thinking visible so you can really see where they're struggling and you can help them better, for sure. Yeah. Dom, yes?
Yes, in Ian's school, I was struck by the level of oracy. The children, all of the children would talk to us, you know, strangers in the classroom, and they would chat away. And the level of metacognition, they would use the same language as the teachers would in a a professional development meeting. They were talking about the the spiral curriculum, for instance, and they would say, "Yes, we did this last year, but now we're doing it at a much deeper level." So they understood where they'd come from and where they were going, and they were reminded by the teachers constantly of what the process was. And you could ask them, "And where's it going to end up?" And most of them will probably say, "I'm going to be an architect of a better world."
Mm-hmm.
And this had all been internalized. Wonderful.
Yes, being aware of your learning journey and the process that you have to go through really gives autonomy, gives motivation, gives interest. I mean, it has so many positives that it's important to do it, to really to be explicit with it. I totally agree with you, Dom. Um, Before we go to the Q&A, would you like to add something, or would you like to prefer to try to do the Q&A, see if there's any questions, and then come back?
I'd just add into what
Yes?
Dom said there again. I think is really important is another saying that we use is no secrets as well. So it's down to the principles again of visible learning. So if you're learning something as the adult, as he said, is that you're explicitly explaining that to the children. So it's not just the adult's got all the cards and knows why we're doing what we're doing. It's sharing that with the children. And I think, you would see like you'd even see like, we've done Simon Sinek golden circles start with a Y with our adults, but you'd see the children using that in the lessons, etc., and so on as well. So yeah, I think I think I'd just echo that visibility of what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Being explicit is so important with yeah, it is so important in the learning process. Yeah. Should I try to, let's see, I'm going to ask, so Brock is the person on the back who's looking at letting people enter from the waiting room and looking at the questions. Brock, are there any questions from our participants that were asked during this panel?
Not for now. If anybody has any questions, they can either just come on and turn on their microphone or put them in the chat as you wish.
Oh, so here we have a question. Shona, would you like, maybe you can just unmute and yes, here is your question.
Oh, thanks. First of all, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting and really encouraging. Sounds like you have a beautiful school, Ian. So, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, at the end of my career now, I think the one learning that I take away more profoundly than ever from all of you and from my experience is that at the end of the day, it's all about relationships. That's the bottom line in everything you do. And maybe that year 10 science teacher, if he or she lived with that, then the Aspire values would be in their class. But I had a question about, certainly only particularly with my UK background, but maybe also in international schools. In primary schools, there's more of often a family culture. Somebody, I don't recall who, but somebody said culture is the way we do things around here. And primary school tend to be more caring, more nurturing, more individualized learning. The children feel safe, and in most primary schools or in the right primary schools. But certainly in big secondary schools, that transition is often really brutal. Kids don't, I believe, often don't feel very safe, don't feel very known. The theory of mattering you mentioned, I don't think they feel like they really matter, especially in the early years. So I'm wondering what experience you have so far and what ideas you have about how to embed the Aspire values more at secondary level. It's kind of building on the question Dunya asked about the year 10, I guess. Thank you.
Shall I start off with that really?
Yes.
I mean, basically, I think you're absolutely right, Shona. I mean, that's exactly the case. There's a lot more primary schools, and we're meeting them, a number of them that are doing an absolutely fantastic job and knowing their children and putting a lot of Aspire into practice. I do think, because I do hear about it, I'm on a couple of revisioning education policy alliance groups, etc. And I do come across some people who are doing the very best they can in the secondary sector. There's in the secondary Aspire book, there's a few examples of what people are doing. It's much more of a struggle because the pressures, I think, to achieve outstanding exam results for those children who are academic, but not at the moment enough for those children who aren't. There was the Times Commission report called Bringing Out the Best, which was published in 2021, I think it was. That is only about 40 pages long, but they talked to an awful lot of people, both in England and outside, about the fact that about a third of pupils, for them, education in secondary school is meaningless. And they are very worried about issues such as, the number of children who are not in education, employment or training, and how that's sort of increasing. I think we are ripe for a major the government won't call it transformation. They want to talk about it as sort of, reform, really, slow step by step. But I think we are absolutely ready and ripe for a major change in our education system. To start with, around how people get assessed on things, because at the moment it's based on academic knowledge and short-term memory. But I think that there's a lot of people around. Please encourage people to join Growing Great Schools Worldwide, who are trying to actually move things forward to make school more relevant and enjoyable for those kids and the teachers who are there.
Yes, definitely. A very important work. And making changes in schools or even in or in a country in education is a very slow process, but we need to do it, and one step at a time.
But I think parents are the people who can drive more of that than they do. I think there's quite a lot of parents who are parents who ask parents, they want their children, they don't always want their children to get, the highest scores. They want them really to be well and happy as much as they want them to get high scores. They want them to be the best they can be, I think. And at the moment, I think there's quite a lot of parents who are pretty unhappy. And I think they need to be more vocal about what they want and what they need for their children in secondary schools.
Yes.
Maybe Dom can talk a bit more about that. And his experience of secondary schools was pretty grim, actually.
I'd agree with everything that's been said so far, and it's a very good point, Shona. It is undoubtedly the way things are set up at the moment. It is much more difficult to apply all this at secondary level. And Sue and I have now we got stuck into the primary project. We're already thinking we've got to go and look at love of learning in secondary schools. So maybe if we're not exhausted after we've finished primary, I think it's a question of priorities. Coming back to that year 10 science teacher, unless they can unless they've got the children on their side, unless all the Aspire principals are operating in that classroom, they're not going to achieve the results that they could get. And what's very obvious in Ian's school is that these two go hand in hand. The SATs results in one of the schools in the Southampton Learning Federation last year, which had been a failing school 10 years before, and has probably more poverty, more social issues than any other school in Southampton. Last year achieved the best SATs results at year 11 of any school in Southampton. And they'd done it by Ian's team moving in and taking over the school 6 years ago and building from the bottom, from year R up to year 6. So this culture was totally embedded. And now behavior it's probably not perfect in that school, but it's very, very good. And very much like the school that Sue and I were in last week. So it's deeply embedded. Now that I think is probably the way it should be tackled at secondary level. You start, it's a long-term project, and you've got to put some things before the academic curriculum. Building that culture for the school has got to be more important. I think the academic curriculum will come and you'll get the results, but you won't do it instantly. You've got to build slowly.
Yes, Michelle?
Just to build on what Dom said, I think part of that picture is teacher wellbeing. So we have a population of teachers in the UK, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world, that are on their knees for many, many reasons. But the challenge then is, if you can't show up and be your best self, how are you possibly going to be able to facilitate the best out of the students in front of you? So again, to link to what Sue was saying earlier, that coming back to SLT and more than that, to leadership outside of schools, to the education system and so on. We've got to be in it for the long game. I think we're not going to change this overnight, but they're really important principles, and we've got to move away from this principle of exam results being everything. That's not the measure. And I'm saying that as a parent. That for me is not the measure of success. A school will have been successful when my child leaves loving learning. That for me is success. I've got a 15-year-old currently, and so he's going into his GCSE year, and I've been very clear with his teachers and with him. I want him to come out of the year in one piece, which is a risk that he won't, because that's true of all of our 15 and 16-year-olds in the UK. And I want him to absolutely still love all the things he loves now in terms of those subjects. That's much more important than whether it's a 5, 6, 7, 8 or 9.
Yes, Sue?
I think we probably need to draw this to a close before
Yes.
too long, but I just want to sort of finish by sort of saying that first of all, there are quite a lot of places in the world who are doing pretty well, certainly a lot better than England, and we should be looking outside our borders, really. But the other thing is that the pillars of learning are learning to do and learning to know and learning to do. This was the UNESCO report that was published quite a long time ago now. And that's the knowledge and skills that have developed hand over fist in the last 100 years. You know, we have amazing knowledge, the Genome Project, space travel, you know, you name it. We've got amazing stuff. But the other two pillars of learning are learning to be and learning to live together, which is what underpins wisdom, actually. And we're leaving those well behind. And that needs to be threaded through schools, through primary and through secondary schools, so that people actually learn to thrive in the world. And as Ian says, be architects of a better world.
It's a lovely way to bring it all together. It's true. We've got different pillars. We need to think of all the pillars and not only focus on one or two. I totally agree. Well, I would like to thank all our participants and especially our guests. So Dom, Ian, Michelle, and Sue. This has been a very inspiring and interesting conversation. It is there's such a need for it. Again, I'm very happy that I'm recording it, because I'm going to put it on the platform so we can reach many more teachers around the world, and hopefully it will encourage them to take the class. So I just want to say Sue is offering a class, a master class on relationship on November the 26th, and this is via Zoom. So you can sign up for that. And she's also offering two short classes at the beginning of November. I think it's the 2nd and the 4th of November. One is on words. And can you just remind me, Sue, the second one?
One's words matter and one's actually teacher wellbeing.
That's right. And these ones are free for you to get a few more ideas and strategies. And then you can join her class on the 26th of November via Zoom. Well, again, thank you all for coming today, for taking the time. And I wish you all the best with everything.
Thanks
Can
very
I
much.
just say, I'm sorry I came in a bit late, but it was such an interesting discussion and I can't wait to see the recording. I agree with everything that was said today, and thank you very much for letting me come in today.
You're very welcome, Rihanna.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good evening. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.